If you were to ever search for the biggest heists in history, you would probably find lists detailing the theft of gold bullion, diamonds, bearer bonds, or millions of dollars in untraceable cash. You'd learn about the Iraq Central Bank heist, the Antwerp Diamond heist, or the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum theft. You'd think of heavily armed men, intricate tunnel systems, or insider jobs involving corrupt bank managers. You'll notice a trend here. Not a single one of those heists involves a single Kit Kat. Well, don't worry. This heist has 413,793 Kit Kats. In March 2026, a truck carrying 12 metric tons of chocolate was hijacked and stolen, and then it vanished. We have no doubt that you've seen the memes about this whole situation, and you probably had the same reaction we did. Laughter, more laughter, then just one giant flashing question. Why? And then a little more laughter. But it got us curious about the actual reason behind such an extremely specific heist. Why would anyone steal that much chocolate? And why Kit Kats specifically? Well, we went digging, and the answers we got took us into a world that most people, including us, didn't even know existed. It turns out that this type of thing has been going on for a long time, right in front of our eyes. In fact, there's a non-zero chance that what you're eating right now was stolen. And by the way, thanks for choosing this video to be the one you watch while you eat. We promise you're in for a treat. On March 26, 2026, a truck left a factory in central Italy carrying 413,793 Kit Kat bars. That's 12 metric tons, stacked in boxes, loaded onto pallets, sealed in a trailer, and pointed northeast toward Poland. From there, they were scheduled to be distributed across Europe. The driver pulled out of the facility and joined a freeway on one of the busiest cargo routes in all of Europe. But the truck never made it to Poland. Somewhere outside Turin, in the northwest of Italy, the truck was pulled over by police. Or, at least, cars that had flashing blue lights of Italian police. But the people inside were not the police. They were thieves, about to perform one of the most well-orchestrated heists Italy's seen in years. Not a smash-and-grab robbery, of course. Much more sophisticated than that. The thieves removed the driver from the cab. They restrained him, and then, before anyone could call emergency services or raise the alarm, they left the driver by the side of the road and drove the 12-ton truck away without a trace. By the time Italian authorities arrived on the scene, the vehicle, along with the hundreds of thousands of chocolate bars on board, was gone. But turns out this wasn't a truck full of just everyday Kit Kats. 2 months prior, in January 2026, Nestle, the Swiss food giant that owns the Kit Kat brand, announced a global massive partnership. Kit Kat was now the official chocolate bar of Formula One, which is pretty big news, given how F1 has grown from a niche sport to a mega brand in its own right. To celebrate the launch, Nestle released a limited edition product, a Kit Kat bar shaped like a miniature Formula One racing car. They were tiny, collectible, and exactly the kind of novelty item that fans of the sport would buy on impulse. But they weren't available everywhere. At launch, Nestle only released them in a handful of markets, including Austria, Italy, France, the United Kingdom, and Switzerland. The rest of the world would have to wait for it. The stolen bars were also crucially leaving the factory exactly 10 days before Easter Sunday. Easter is pretty much the Super Bowl of the chocolate industry. It is the absolute peak of annual demand worldwide. Retailers are desperate for stock, supply chains are stretched to their limits, and consumers are buying chocolate at volume that wouldn't be matched for the rest of the year. That was the situation when the truck left the factory. A limited edition product tied to a massive global brand, moving at the exact moment of maximum market demand. Now, we have no way of knowing for sure, but most likely, the thieves had to have known this. If they didn't, they got extremely lucky. However, most robberies like this one tend to follow the same pattern. They have to know the route, the departure time, and they usually know exactly what's inside that specific trailer. That kind of information, of course, comes from one place, the inside. Someone connected to the logistics chain may have told them the truck was coming. It could have been a dispatcher, a warehouse worker, a freight broker. Whoever it was, they most likely tipped the thieves off. Who then executed the intercept perfectly? When you hear about a big-time sophisticated robbery like this, the first question we usually ask is, who? Who did it? Who had the audacity to hijack a commercial vehicle in broad daylight while impersonating police? But in this case, the who isn't the only nagging question. It's the why. Why would anyone go to this much trouble, take this much risk, to steal 12 tons of chocolate of all things? Within hours of Nestle confirming the theft on March 28th, the story went viral. Not because cargo crime is usually trending news, it isn't, but because the sheer absurdity of the crime short-circuited the internet. A truck full of 12 tons of Kit Kats stolen by fake police goes missing without a trace? It kind of sounds like a rejected script for every low-stakes heist movie, but that is exactly why people started running with the memes. On Twitter, people started posting altered images from iconic TV and movies like Fast and Furious and Breaking Bad. But some people were considering the important questions. I understand stealing money, gold, food, but stealing chocolate is just plain stupid. Imagine going to jail for stealing Kit Kat. Another noted, of all the things to steal, LOL. Can you imagine the planning that went into this? The first meeting must have seemed like a joke. Reddit had a field day. Threads appeared in r/news, r/nottheonion, and r/interesting simultaneously. But all of this was just the beginning. Nestle and Kit Kat were facing a potentially devastating crisis. Fortunately for them, in our modern world, corporations have a new playbook to handle crises, and the number one rule is, don't take it seriously. Kit Kat's own social media team confirmed the theft with a statement that included the line, "We've always encouraged people to have a break with Kit Kat, but it seems thieves have taken the message too literally." Suddenly, every other company and brand rushed to get in on the joke. KFC, Denny's, the Tampa International Airport, Ryanair, Cineplex, the Charlotte Football Club. The city of Montreal announced a fictional Kit Kat bagel. Even the Ronald Reagan Foundation got involved. The Wall Street Journal ran a piece praising Kit Kat's response as PR gold. It was funny, it was absurd, it was exactly the kind of story the internet loves to play with for 48 hours before moving on to another scandal or meme. They had turned a disastrous incident into a massive marketing win. But underneath all the brand opportunism and the memes, people still want to know, as one Twitter user put it simply, what the f is someone going to do with 12 tons of Kit Kat bars? It's a good question, and as we began digging for answers, we realized that this is not the first time that something like this happened. Not even close. In 2023, a 32-year-old man in England was convicted of stealing nearly 200,000 Cadbury cream eggs, worth approximately $48,000, from a warehouse just before Easter. He used a metal grinder to break in and a stolen truck to haul the eggs away, but the police soon caught him on the highway. In 2024, thieves stole approximately $2.5 million worth of premium olive oil from a warehouse in Houston, Texas, 18 truckloads to be exact. The stolen oil began appearing in stores almost immediately, selling at steep discounts, sometimes half the normal retail price. The company believed the operation was organized and pleaded with the public for help. But of course, most of the oil was never recovered. The thieves were never found. And it's not just happening in Europe and the United States. In 2011, thieves in Quebec executed what became known as the Great Maple Syrup Heist. Over the course of a year, they systematically siphoned nearly 3,000 tons of maple syrup from the Global Strategic Maple Syrup Reserve, replacing it with water so the barrels maintained their weight during routine checks. The stolen syrup was worth 18.7 million Canadian dollars. 26 people were eventually arrested, but the syrup was never recovered. In Germany, the theft of Nutella has become something of an industry in itself. In April 2013, 5 tons of Nutella were stolen from a parked trailer in Bad Hersfeld. In 2017, another 20 tons of Nutella and Kinder Surprise eggs vanished in central Germany. In 2019, 20 tons of Milka chocolate was stolen in Austria. The thieves used a false freight booking to collect and load from a legitimate warehouse, then simply drove it away. The chocolate was never recovered. And this trend of grand food larceny is only increasing, chocolate being one of the most notable targets. In 2024, the global price of cocoa exploded. Supply constraints, driven by weather patterns and disease in West Africa, nearly tripled cocoa prices. In response, chocolate manufacturers were forced to raise their prices. Or should we say, Big Chocolate chose to raise prices rather than decrease CEO and shareholder profits. Since then, chocolate has been shifting from a cheap treat into a premium commodity. At the same time, food prices are up across the board. And whenever the price of legitimate goods rises, people take things into their own hands. Literally. The British Retail Consortium reported 5.5 million shoplifting incidents in the UK in the past year alone, costing retailers nearly £400 million. Organized retail crime groups have been specifically targeting high-demand, easily resold items like chocolate. Supermarkets in Britain have started placing chocolate bars in anti-theft security boxes, the same kind of plastic cases usually reserved for razor blades and expensive spirits. It really has come to that. According to Verisk CargoNet, which tracks supply chain crime across the United States and Canada, estimated cargo theft losses in North America in 2025 surged to nearly $725 million. That was a 60% increase from the previous year. And the category that saw the largest single increase, you guessed it, food and beverage, up 47%. In Europe, the situation was identical. A report published just weeks before the Kit Kat heist warned that cargo theft across the continent was escalating rapidly. The report noted that criminals were using increasingly sophisticated tactics like fake carriers, stolen identities, forged documents, and digital manipulation of logistics systems. And once again, the TT Club and BSI's 2024 cargo theft report found that food and beverage products were the most frequently stolen category in Europe, accounting for 22% of all cargo theft incidents. As recently as 2024, London experienced what the press immediately dubbed the Great Cheese Robbery. Neal's Yard Dairy, one of Britain's most respected artisanal cheese retailers, announced that it had been the victim of a sophisticated fraud. Thieves, posing as a legitimate French wholesaler distributor, had placed orders for large quantities of cheese, presented convincing documentation, and simply never paid, walking away with 24 tons of cloth-bound artisanal cheddar worth approximately $400,000. 6 people were ultimately arrested, but the cheese itself was never recovered. But why food? Why not put this effort into stealing something actually valuable? Well, while it may be easier to transport, let's say $1 million worth of diamonds than $1 million worth of candy bars, the biggest logistical hurdle in theft is often not transportation or even the heist itself, but finding a way to transform whatever was stolen into cold, hard, untraceable cash. No matter what part of the world you live in, we're all part of the global economy. But of course, there's also a shadow economy operating right underneath the legitimate one, the black market. When we think about the black market, we think of it as an incredibly dangerous, sketchy world of trafficking people, organs, narcotics, etc., essentially a marketplace for bad guys selling bad goods. We never think of it for menial, everyday items like food. But if you think about it a bit harder, food is actually the perfect stolen commodity. If you steal a truck full of iPhones, every single one of those phones has a serial number. The moment someone turns it on and connects to a network, Apple knows where it is. If you steal a truck full of designer handbags, they are highly distinctive. No legitimate store can sell them without raising suspicions. But food is everywhere. It always looks the same. It's a totally anonymous and untrackable product. A stolen Kit Kat bar looks exactly like a legally purchased Kit Kat bar. It has no serial number. It has no tracking chip. Now, Nestle has since clarified that these stolen Formula One bars could be identified by their batch codes, but a batch code only tells you when and where it was made. It doesn't transmit a GPS signal. But beyond being hard to track, there's a more fundamental trait to food that makes it such a perfect thing for thieves to steal. Food is consumed. The evidence literally disappears. By the time an investigator traces a stolen shipment of chocolate to a variety of market stalls or discount retailers, the product has already been eaten. The contraband has been digested. There's next to no proof that anything even happened, and no way to trace it to the criminal who stole it. And that's because the infrastructure to move it is already established at a huge scale. Organized retail crime groups don't steal 12 tons of chocolate and then try to sell it out of the trunk of a car. That would be absurd. They sell it to a very unique shadow economy that's not quite as hidden or, disturbing as the black market. So, they call it the gray market. The gray market is the vast network of discount stores, independent corner shops, market stalls, and online resellers that operate just outside the strict supply chains of major supermarkets. These vendors are always looking for cheap inventory. If a broker approaches them offering a pallet of Formula One Kit Kats at a 40% discount, they buy it. They don't ask questions, they just put it on the shelf and enjoy the extra profit. But for the criminals who have to get those pallets, it's a little more complicated. When they're not doing a more conventional heist, like the one we just saw recently with the Kit Kats, those criminals often set up fake logistics companies with legitimate-looking websites and forged insurance documents. They bid on loads from legitimate freight brokers, win the contract, and then either steal the cargo themselves or subcontract it to an actual driver who's none the wiser, redirecting the delivery to a shadow warehouse. By the time the original shipper realizes the cargo is missing, the fake supply company has vanished, and the goods are already being broken down into smaller pallets for resale. This is how food moves through the gray market. It doesn't look like a drug deal in an alleyway the way we think of the black market. This is a lot more mundane. It's more like a guy in a high-vis vest dropping off a pallet of chocolate at the back door of a discount supermarket. It's completely normalized. So normalized that it's most likely happening right in front of your very eyes. But the gray market isn't just about corner shops and market stalls. Stolen food products increasingly surface on online marketplaces, the kind of platforms where a third-party seller can list discounted chocolate bars with no questions asked. The product or listing might look legitimate or professional, and you, the buyer, who just thinks you're getting a good deal, have absolutely no idea that you're buying stolen goods. Nestle acknowledged this directly when they confirmed that the Great Kit Kat heist actually happened and wasn't just a marketing hoax. They warned that the stolen bars may appear through unofficial or gray market sales channels and urged anyone who encountered them to contact the company. Of course, they're being very optimistic if they think someone will report a discounted chocolate bar. But this is a company that has clearly thought very carefully about exactly how stolen food moves through the market because they've seen it before, and because they know that once the product enters the gray market, the chances of recovering it are essentially zero. You can't unsell a chocolate bar. So, who did it? Who stole 12 tons of Kit Kats? That is a question that Italian investigators are now trying to answer. And the honest answer, as of recording this, is that nobody knows. No arrests have been made, no suspects have been publicly named, the truck has not been found. But obviously, this is not the work of amateurs. And if we look back at other similar crimes in Italy, we can at least get a good idea of the type of people capable of pulling something like this off. In 2014, a transport hub near Lodi in northern Italy was hit by a massive cargo theft. The thieves made off with approximately 175 tons of Lindt chocolate. That is more than 14 times the size of the Kit Kat heist. But when Italian prosecutors finally cracked the case, they didn't find a group of opportunistic truck hijackers. They found a highly structured criminal network with deep ties to the Camorra, one of Italy's oldest and most powerful mafia organizations. Yes, the mafia was stealing chocolate. They had the logistics, the connections, and the warehouses to store it. They had the front companies to launder the paperwork, and they had the distribution networks to push 175 tons of luxury Swiss chocolate into the legitimate retail market without raising red flags. This is what law enforcement agencies call strategic theft. You see, over the past decade, organized crime syndicates have realized that hijacking a truck full of food is significantly less risky than trafficking narcotics. The penalties are lower, for one, and the police prioritize it less. If you get caught with a truck full of drugs, you go to prison for decades. If you get caught with a truck full of chocolate, you might get a few years for grand theft and receiving stolen property. But the profit margins when you steal the product for free are enormous, and the market is entirely legitimate. You don't have to convince people to buy chocolate. Everyone buys chocolate. You just have to offer it to them slightly cheaper than the supermarket does. The TT Club, a leading provider of insurance and risk management services to the international transport industry, published a report on freight crime in Italy. They identified the country as one of the highest risk environments in Europe for cargo theft, specifically noting the involvement of organized criminal networks. The report documented a consistent pattern. Criminal groups embed informants within legitimate logistic companies, gather intelligence on high-value shipments, and then execute the theft. The method used in the Kit Kat heist, impersonating law enforcement to stop a vehicle on a public road, is a known and documented technique. It has been used in Italy, Spain, and Eastern Europe for years. The thieves who stopped that truck outside Turin were just following a very common playbook. You're only just hearing about food theft like this now because, well, it's Kit Kat, and that's funnier than Lindt, I guess. And crucially, the operation doesn't end when the truck is stolen. The most sophisticated criminal networks have the entire pipeline mapped out in advance. They likely have cold storage to keep temperature-sensitive products viable, front companies to issue fake invoices, and networks of buyers who know not to ask too many questions. By the time the product hits the shelf, it has been passed through 3 or 4 layers of plausible deniability. The trail is cold before the investigation even begins. So, no, the Kit Kat bars are not sitting in someone's garage. They have probably already been broken down, repackaged, and are in the process of being distributed. Every day that passes, the evidence gets further away. And every day that passes, it is more likely that someone, somewhere, is eating a stolen chocolate race car and not bothering to wonder why it was so cheap. And that is exactly why this keeps happening. Because, despite what movies tell you, the perfect crime isn't stealing a giant, priceless diamond. That's actually one of the worst possible situations. No, the perfect crime is the one where the evidence gets eaten. And because of this, somewhere out there, someone got a very good break. And they're probably already planning their next one.